Okay, very good morning to one and all. The topic that I'm going to be talking about is indifference curve analysis and consumer equilibrium. So, when we talk about the indifference curve approach, then it is mainly concerned with the satisfaction of the consumer. It is a consumer based approach, and the basic assumption that indifference curve analysis is based upon is that consumers' satisfaction is non measurable. It goes in contradictory to the Marshall's approach, who says that utility is measurable, and he even gave it a unit called utils. So he assumed that utility or consumers' satisfaction is measurable in cardinal units. So he called it as a cardinal concept, whereas the indifference curve was based on the assumption that utility or the satisfaction cannot be measurable. It cannot be measured. This was further also initially presented by Mr. Edgeworth, who propounded the concept, and several other economists, mathematicians, statisticians worked over this concept. Like Pareto also used this concept when it came to the consumer satisfaction or consumer preference. Allen and Hicks also perfected it because they worked upon it and got the advanced version. So, consumer preference actually served as the foundation of indifference curve analysis. We can say this. Now, what are indifference curve? What is the concept? What is the definition? So, it is simply that curve which represents or depicts the various combination of goods and services which a consumer don't want to change, or we can say that consumer is indifferent for all those combination. Why is that so? Because consumer is getting the maximum satisfaction out of it, and each point on this indifference curve represent equal level of satisfaction. So we can say that since the consumer is deriving equal level of satisfaction at each combination, so that is why the consumer is completely indifferent or don't want to change this combination. Now there are a few assumptions, like any other concept in indifference curve analysis also has a few assumptions. The very first assumption says that consumer can think about the best of his interest, and he thinks in a rational manner to get the best out of his purchase. The main motive here is to derive the maximum satisfaction out of each purchase, which is the next assumption. And a consumer has his own preferences, own choices, on the basis of which he or she makes a purchase. The other assumption says that we earlier discussed also, that utility cannot be measured exactly, like it cannot be quantified, but it can be compared in a competitive way. Then an objective measurement of utility or satisfaction is possible. Now the next assumption says that a single commodity alone is never demanded. Consumer always goes for a combination. So consumer always need combination of goods, not just a single good. Now it is possible from a consumer to compare the total satisfaction derived from one particular combination of goods with the total satisfaction derived from another combination of goods. Like there's the earlier assumption that says that goods or commodities are always demanded in combination, and once they are being purchased, then the consumer can definitely compare the satisfaction derived from one combination to another one. Now there is this another associated concept, which is indifference curve schedule. What is indifference curve schedule? It is simply the tabular representation of the combination of goods and two goods and the quantities that the consumer has purchased. Like here we can see that there is a table where the first column shows the combinations the second column shows one fruit, and the other third column shows the another fruit. So the combination shows different five combinations basically, where the different quantities of bananas and oranges are being purchased, but they will give the same amount of satisfaction or the same level of satisfaction. Now, indifference curve, since the name itself says that it is a diagrammatic representation of that indifference schedule only. So, whenever that indifference schedule is depicted diagrammatically, it is known as indifference curve. Like the schedule was a list of the various combination of goods, uh, giving them equal level of satisfaction. Now we can see how it is represented diagrammatically. See, there are two diagrams here. The first is where the oranges are being represented on the x-axis and bananas are on the y-axis, and the IC shows indifference curve. Here we can see that the upper one I'm talking about, that on the point A on IC there is this combination of oranges and bananas. Like on point A, OM quantity of oranges are being taken along with ON quantity of bananas. Coming to the second diagram, little below the first one, here two ICs are being shown. The first IC or the first indifference curve is IC1 and the second one is IC2. So here we can see on IC1, which is the very first indifference curve, at the point K there is this combination with OM quantities of oranges and OR quantities of banana. When we move to IC2, we can see that the OR quantity of bananas has been shifted. There is this extension, but there is a shift towards the right, where the quantities of oranges are being increased from OM level to ON level. But when we talk about the quantities of banana, the level is the same. Like earlier, OR was equal to MK. Here it is at the same level, which is NL. So the observation here is that the IC has been shifted, or the indifference curve has been shifted towards the right hand side, where the more quantities of oranges are being demanded, but the quantities of bananas are being kept the same. This is almost the same explanation that we talked about. Seeing the diagram, I already explained it there. The level of satisfaction to the consumer is therefore bound to be greater at point L than at point K. Hence, IC2 represents a higher level of satisfaction than IC1. Why is it so? Because at point L there is more quantity of oranges are being consumed, and it is one of the basic assumptions that higher the quantity of consumption, higher will be the level of satisfaction. That is why we can say that the rightward shift of indifference curve, where it has been shifted and transformed to IC2, the point L shows the higher level of satisfaction as compared to point K on IC1. Now, what are the properties of indifference curve? See, this is a very important part. So the very first property says that indifference curves never slope downwards. Why is that so? Because if they start sloping downwards, that would mean that the quantity of one good increases, the quantity of other good must decrease. Why is that so? Because the downward sloping curve shows the negative slope, and since the constraint here is to keep the same level of utility, therefore if we are increasing the quantity of one good, we have to compromise the quantity of the other good, which is being based on the law of diminishing marginal utility. That is also being described and explained on my channel. If you want to see, you can just check it out. It has been explained in detail there. So this law says that as a consumer consumes more of a good, the additional utility derived from each additional unit of the good decreases. So it is kind of contradictory to the basic nature of indifference curve. That is why the indifference curve will slope downward, because here we have to keep the utility level same, and the moment we start consuming uh, the additional units of a particular good, keeping the other things constant, the additional utility derived would start diminishing. Now the other very important assumption is that indifference curve can never intersect. Why is that so? Like in the diagram it has been shown that there are two indifference curves, IC1 and IC2. At point A they are intersecting each other. Just earlier we saw that there were two indifference curves, IC1 and IC2, and there was a rightward shift towards IC2, and the conclusion derived was that at IC2 the consumer would derive more level of satisfaction. So meaning to say that the more rightward the indifference curve would shift, that would show a higher level of satisfaction. Now what we can say here is there are 3 points basically. The IC at point C, this point C is above point B, meaning to say that IC2, why is that so? Because IC2 here is higher than IC1, showing the higher level of satisfaction. And we know that at indifference curve there is an equal level of satisfaction derived at each point. So meaning to say that the utility derived at point C would be same as the utility derived at point A. But what is happening at point A, and suppose that the utility derived at point C is 10, so at point A it has to be 10 only. But at IC1 at point B the utility derived has to be lesser than the utility derived at point C. So let us assume that at point B it is 8. Now what is happening, that point A is been coinciding on both the curves because they are intersecting at each other. So since A is initially on been shown on IC2, so the utility derived here has to be 10. But since there is an intersection, and at the point of intersection the value becomes equal, so as per the rule of intersection, it has to be equal to point B's utility also, which is 8, which is not possible. So that is why two indifference curves can never intersect each other. Indifference curves are convex to origin. That shows the basic nature of formation of any curve, because it is being derived by the slope of the curve. So why is indifference curve convex to origin? Because they become flatter as they move away from the origin. This is being reflected by the fact that consumer generally prefers some level of variety in their consumption, and as they consume more of a good, the marginal utility derived from it decreases. That is again being based on the law of diminishing marginal utility that we discussed earlier. Now this also is here also we are aware of this thing, that the higher the indifference curve would land, it will show the higher level of utility, meaning to say that the further away the indifference curve are from the origin, it will show a higher level of utility. Why? Because they represent combination of goods that provide more satisfaction to the consumer. Therefore an indifference curve that lies above another indifference curve represent a higher level of utility. For example, here IC would show a higher level of utility as compared to IC2, and IC2 would show a higher level of utility as compared to IC1. Indifference curve do not intersect the axis. Why they never touch the axis? Because agar aisa ho, or if they did it, it would imply that the consumer could derive utility from consuming only one good, which is not possible. It is as it is going in contradiction to the basic assumption that consumer always consumes a good in combination that we understood earlier. Now, how the consumer equilibrium is derived out of this concept? When a consumer is completely satisfied, he is said to be in equilibrium. Okay. So, in order to achieve the highest level of satisfaction, every rational consumer will endeavor to be on the highest possible indifference curve, because we just got to know that the further the indifference curve from the origin, it will represent the higher and higher satisfaction. So the consumer would try to have the maximum possible satisfaction. Now, since he is constrained by the size of his income, he has a limited budget and the market prices of that commodity that he want to purchase. So what would happen, that the state of equilibrium that an end user of good achieves, and it refers to the number of goods and the services they are able to purchase in light of their current income and cost prices. Now, the shopper balance allows a client to get the maximum or the most potential fulfillment from their pay, meaning to say that the consumer will be only at the point of equilibrium if he gets the maximum satisfaction based on the purchasing ability of that consumer. So, whatever the budget he is or she is holding, they should get the maximum satisfaction out of it. Now, what are the conditions? So, there are a few conditions. Only if they are met, the consumer is said to be in equilibrium. For example, if the price of commodity is capital X and it's been expressed in rupees, it has to be equivalent to its marginal utility. Marginal utility is what? It is the additional utility that the consumer is deriving out of the one additional unit of purchase or the consumption. So now the very first condition says that the marginal utility has to be equal to the price. MUX has to be equal to PX, where P is the price and MU is the marginal utility. If it is expressed in utils, then still the condition of equilibrium is the same. Now it has been expressed in three ways. The first is MUX, the second is where it is being represented in expressed in rupees, the second is where it is expressed in utils, and the third is where it is represented as MUM, where the MUM is the marginal utility of money and which has been kept constant. There is just an example to make you understand it better. If I've taken here this example of a fruit ice cream. For example, the price of one ice cream scoop is rupees 30, and MUM, which is the marginal utility of money, is equals to 1 util. Now there is a table where this the consumption pattern is being shown. So the marginal we can see that number of units are being given which are being consumed in the first column. The second shows the marginal utility of ice cream scoop, which is being expressed in utils. The third column shows the marginal utility of money, rupees 1 in utils. Then the further it is marginal utility of ice cream scoop, where the two columns are being compared taking the ratio. So we can see when the first unit is being taken, the MU of ice cream was 50 and the MU of money was 1. So when they are compared, the ratio gives 50, which is more than 30. Now the price of ice cream scoop is given in the last column. So of course here the first ratio shows that it is more than 30. So it is much more than the price of the ice cream. In the third combination, if we see that the ratio is 30, so here we can say that since the marginal utility of ice cream is equal to its price, which is 30, so this is the point of equilibrium, because here the condition of MUX equal to PX is being satisfied. So it is just an example to explain how this concept work. The same has been explained here. The assumptions are being explained here again briefly, uh, considering a few more points: that there is free market economy, the goods are freely available, the commodities are homogeneous and divisible, the prices are constant. So these are a few brief assumptions, and the consumer is rational and has possesses the best knowledge of the market. So this was the concept. Just keep learning, and I'll be coming with such more videos and topics for you. I wish you good luck. Thank you.